Welcome to Faith Over Pharma, the podcast for couples trying to conceive after a vasectomy reversal. I'm Susan Gladstein, holistic reproductive health practitioner, functional nutrition specialist, and your fertility detective. Around here, we talk about all the things mainstream medicine often misses and the faith that it takes to keep going when you wanted a baby like yesterday. If you're tired of being told to wait, to retest, or just move straight to IVF without anyone looking at the full picture, then you're in the right place. If you've ever been in the place where you wanted a baby so badly that you would do almost anything to get there, this conversation is for you. Because the fertility journey isn't always as simple as just do IVF or just adopt or just use donor eggs or just keep trusting God. Sometimes when you're in the middle of infertility, you're making decisions from a place of desperation, heartbreak, exhaustion, and longing. You're just trying to take the next step. You're trying to survive the next no, the next failed cycle, the next loss, the next appointment, or the next Mother's Day that feels impossible to get through. What happens when the thing that you prayed for finally starts moving forward, and now you're carrying a whole new set of questions that you never fully prepared to answer? Today, I'm joined by Kristen. She's a wife, a mom, and an entrepreneur whose path to motherhood has included IVF, adoption, donor eggs, miscarriage, and the complicated emotional and spiritual weight of fertility decisions. She and her husband began fertility treatments in 2017, and on Mother's Day of all times, in 2018, they were told that none of their embryos had made it to blast. They later chose adoption and welcomed their daughter in 2019, which became a beautiful and redemptive part of their story. And years later, they returned to IVF, walked through more failed rounds and loss, and eventually used donor eggs, which finally gave them embryos, but also brought these questions that they never really expected to face. And today we're going to have an honest conversation about longing, loss, motherhood, adoption, all the things, and the complicated middle that so many couples are never really prepared for. So thank you, Kristen, so much for being here and willing to share your story, because I know just on my own experience, but in so many of my clients' experiences as well, when you were told whatever your diagnosis is, or even if there's no answers, the automatic thing is just move to IUI or IVF. So, and my thing is like, well, let's really look at the root cause of things and prepare yourself physically, mentally, spiritually to make that as successful as possible. But I'd love to just really start with your story. And I know I shared a little bit about it, but I would love how your journey began and even what it felt like to be told that donor eggs were your only option.
Yeah, so kind of have to go back to when I was actually a teenager. Weirdly enough, when I was a teenager, I had this like gut feeling like, you're not going to have your own kids. And I never understood it. When my friends would ask me, they'd be like, so how many kids do you want? I don't know if I'm going to have any. Why? I don't know. Just don't think I'm going to be able to have any of my own. Fast forward, we get married. And immediately we're like, okay, we're going to have kids. And my husband looks at me. He goes, okay, well, let's just start trying. Okay. But I just feel like I need to go straight to the doctor because I just had that like thing in my gut that was like, you're not going to have your own kids, Kristen. So I think it was 2015. We went and we saw my OB and he said, oh, we'll talk about your thyroid because my thyroid was a thing. He put me on thyroid medication and he's like, let's just get your thyroid where it needs to be and then see if you can get pregnant. And something still inside me was like, I don't know. I don't know if this just feels right. Let's just go consult with a fertility doctor because that always just felt like what was supposed to happen in my mind because I just thought, okay, well, my body just can't do it. Let's just go that route. So we saw the fertility doctor in 2017, immediate IVF. And I think I've shared some of my labs with you. So you kind of know, and we can kind of hit on that if you want. I don't mind sharing any of that. And we did a round of IVF. The round of IVF, I think was 10 eggs or 10. Yeah, 10. And then 8 matured and then 6 made it to blast. And then that's when we got the call on Mother's Day of all days that none of them made it. And so when we got that call, I was like, okay, I don't know what I can do. I had to take a step back. I didn't want to do it anymore. I was like, okay, God, what do you got in store for me? I'm ready, but also not ready at the same time. So that's kind of how our journey all started, was that I think that phone call really was what kind of like, I know I should have started in a different place, but I think that that was the call that kind of changed my life forever, because I was like, okay, we're just not going to have our own kids. Don't know what to say.
And it's like such a, I mean, it's interesting that you sort of had a gut feeling, even at a young age, that maybe your path didn't look like you were going to have your own kids. And I
Yeah.
think that is particularly interesting because maybe the Lord was already preparing you to open your heart to other possibilities because
Oh,
you guys adopted your beautiful
yeah.
daughter. And so I think that's very interesting because that comes from a different place of, the fear, if it was already in your heart that that
Mhm.
was the way.
Yeah.
Because I think so many people get to that point, especially like they've had a vasectomy reversal, and I think the devil loves to take hold of your heart and your mind and start filling it with lies that it's never going to happen. And I always say, like, the path never really looks the way you think it's going to. It's never in the time that you think it is. But I still believe with all of my heart that God writes the best stories, even in the
Mhm.
heartache, even in the loss. And so for you, that pivotal moment of Mother's Day, like, kind of walk me through what you mean by that, because I know that there's somebody that's listening that is like they're in that pivotal moment now.
Think in that moment, I think one, I became very angry at God. Obviously, I was like, I don't understand. Like, I don't, why me of all people? Like, in second grade, Kristen would have been like, hey, what are you going to be when you grow up? I'm going to be a wife and a mom, you know? So I was like, I was so angry at God, but also at the same time, there was like this beautiful, like, redemption for me of understanding, like, why I truly wanted to have kids. And it wasn't to like have somebody that looked like me or to necessarily experience. I mean, I did want to experience pregnancy, obviously, but it was, I think it just opened my eyes to understand like why I really wanted to have a child. And it wasn't for anything other than to have a child to love and care for and nurture and raise and all the wonderful things that you get to experience with children. And so I think it was just that moment. I was just like, okay, Kristen, it's not about anything other than just having a child, and whatever that looks like, however that looks, it's going to be okay.
I love that. And I love how, God, if we're staying in tune with him, and I will say that I had a miscarriage and I was very angry with God. And even in the 2 years that it took us to have our daughter, I was in that same boat of like anger. Like the Lord had worked it out so beautifully and so perfectly. And then it all came to a screeching halt. And I was angry. And the one thing that I will say is I had spent a lot of time working on a lot of emotional trauma and building my foundations health wise. Like, really, I'd always put my health last. It was like the kids
Mhm.
will probably die if I go to the gym kind of mentality. And so I just wasn't taking good care of myself. But then I had spent this 2 years of really focusing on that. And I always say that, if you're carrying around a bucket full of guilt, shame, anger, whatever your bucket is filled with, you have to let that out in order for the Lord to pass in,
Yeah.
like, the blessings that he has for you. And I can't tell you how many times I see in this community women that will say things like, I don't know if I can do another negative. I don't know if I can do another failed, IVF round or whatever. And I don't know that I ever felt that way because I was just so like whatever it was going to take to get the babies I wanted, that was the result I wanted. And I can't imagine looking at either one of my kids now and thinking like, oh, I wish I would have followed through and given up on this because the journey is hard. But I think if you understand and lean into like the Lord's timing and know that it's perfect. I'm not saying it makes it easier. The wait's
Yeah.
terrible, right?
Right.
Loss is terrible. Bad news is terrible. But I will say that it definitely strengthened my faith. And I don't know if you had that same experience throughout your process or if that came much later.
Well, I will tell you, you know how you mentioned, the devil likes to whisper things in your ear? He was doing a really good job at that moment. And that, I think we had been married 4 years at that time, but we had been together for 10, I think, total. I think he was whispering in my mind or in my ear, and I started to self-sabotage my relationship. And it was probably the worst time in our marriage. I don't know what kind of like clicked in my head or what changed in my head or what had happened, but we had separated for probably about 6 months. And we had a conversation one night, and it's probably relates to our first conversation as before we got married of, hey, if you don't want to have kids, I don't want to be with you. So I think that stuck in my head as well of like, oh, I can't have your children. So I guess you just don't want to be with me. 6 months later, we had a conversation. He's like, hey, I don't just want to have like, I love you. We're married. And if you can't have children, that's okay. We can look at all other alternatives, whatever that looks like, because the idea of having children for him also was, I just want to have a child to love. Like, I don't necessarily, I want to be fulfilled in that part of my life. And so it took probably about 8 months before I started to really like, okay, I have to lean into God more and talk to him more about how I'm feeling and not be so angry at him because he's rescuing us before we know that we need to be rescued. And I have to trust in that the story he has written for me is beautiful. And it was truly beautiful because we got that call on Mother's Day of 2018, and almost a year to the day, May of 2019, we had our daughter. So he knew exactly what he was doing. I just had to trust his timing and trust what he was doing.
Well, and I think that's like easier said in hindsight because when you're in the thick of it and you just wanted a baby yesterday, you want to take whatever path is going to shortcut you to that result. And I think that that's a big thing that I personally want to educate, advocate for all of the things. Because I know even you and I have had a conversation looking back at that time frame. You were told you have the eggs of a 45-year-old when you were not. I mean, you're not even 45.
No,
So,
I'm not.
so getting that at a young age, having it in the back of your head as a teenager that you weren't going to have your own children, like obviously the Lord set you up for where you're at. But also, there's a lot of things that people do not prepare you for in the fertility clinic when it comes to decisions that you have to make with IVF. And so I would love for you, this is like a burning question, an episode that I've wanted to do about IVF because, yes, it is an amazing thing for some couples. But in my experience, there was no looking at the root of causes of why we were not getting pregnant naturally. It was, his numbers are great. You look fantastic. Just do IUI or IVF. And there was something about that at that time. Yes, I wanted a baby. And yes, I did IUI. The meds made me like really sick. And I started wondering why I was playing God in all of this and really leaned into that. But there's so many things that are missed. Obviously, you go to a clinic, they're going to sell you on what they have to offer. And it's not always root cause, which is a big thing, like why I got into what I'm doing, because it may not be, it can be an answer, but it's not the only answer. But I think that for so many people, especially in this community, you think that that's all there is. You're doing all the things you can't really explain. I mean, in your case, it was a little bit different because they told you you had, old eggs, which is interesting now looking back at your labs. But I would love for you kind of just to share some of that, like in that process, what you didn't know that you had to learn, something that you would advocate for somebody listening going through the process.
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about this a little bit. Like, I didn't know so much about like, I know my thyroid affected things, but I didn't really know like how much my thyroid affected it. And my thyroid levels were normal, quote unquote, but not normal to get pregnant. Also, my iron levels are not great at all. Nobody talked to me about that. Nobody talked to me about my vitamin D. Nobody talked to me about a lot of things that were going on in my body. It was just like, your eggs kind of suck. So let's go to IVF. So it was more of a we're not going to talk about what's underlying and what's happening and what could be causing all of the issues. It was more about like, okay, you don't have good eggs, so we're just going to go to IVF because that's going to be the quick, fast, easy thing to get you pregnant because that's what you want and that's what you're being sold on. And when you have all your emotions heightened and the only thing that you want is a baby, you hear, okay, we can get you a baby. Okay, you're going to get me a baby. So I'm going to do whatever I have to do to get the baby. But let's not talk about anything else that may be going on in my body. And I think that after realizing and looking at everything that I took during my IVF cycle, it's a wonder that today I kind of have some of the issues that I'm having today because of everything that I was being pushed at the time, medication wise. And that's probably something you can probably talk better about than me because I'm not really like 100% sure on, I know what they gave me, but I don't know everything that they gave me and what everything was doing to me. But I know how it's affecting me today. And I wish more people knew that everything that they were pushing inside of you, when you get to the other side, your body is not going to be the same at all, at
Yes,
all.
I see that a lot, and it's something that I'm glad we're having this conversation because I don't know, there is a price to pay. I don't know if that's the right terminology or expression, but if you are artificially pumping your body to produce more eggs than you would naturally produce, it would make sense, but nobody talks about it. It would make sense that your body, in the amazing way that God created it, would have to do something to normalize and live. I mean, your body is constantly just going to look for a baseline of survival, whatever that looks like. And if you're in constant survival mode, if there is something that's off, other things are going to come in and sort of try to equal that all out. And so I think that's why I'm very passionate about what I do because most clinics are not looking at all of the things
Mhm.
that are going to tell the picture. They're looking at a single number in a lab, and if it's in the normal range, it's good. But the way that the body works, especially with hormones, is if something is a little bit off, it's going to compensate and raise other things to make it to where you don't hopefully feel bad or die. Like that's it,
Yeah.
what you're trying to do is not die. So if you're just working off of one lab marker that's in the normal range, it doesn't tell the full picture. And we kind of like dived into that this morning with your
Yeah.
lab specifically, but it's something that it just like almost infuriates me because in your situation, it was your eggs. You have diminished ovarian reserve at 32 years old. And there was no question why. Why
Right.
at 32 years old do you have diminished ovarian reserve? And in fact, looking at your labs, the first result, it was not diminished ovarian reserve. Your LH was high, which I would maybe have asked more questions about that to figure out like, were you under stress? Like you had come off of birth control. Did you actually process all of that? Did you have exposures to toxins? You know, all of these other markers that were not like metabolic wise. Was your blood sugar all over the map? Because that impacts your hormones. How was your sleep? Because that would impact but none of that was
No,
ever questioned, right?
no, none of
And
it.
the fact that they were able to retrieve 10 eggs, fertilize them, it was the after the fact fertilization that became the issue, but that was never addressed. It was just, well, you have diminished ovarian reserve.
Right.
So the right questions were not being asked, which is obviously why I'm passionate about like if that is the method that you're going to go, I want everyone to go in it with the best possible. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have people come to me where their sperm parameters are terrible and they're told just do IUI. Well, you can move sperm closer to the egg, but the egg is still going to do its thing. And even in your case, we kind of talked about so eggs, there's more studies that are coming out about it. But if the sperm quality is not great, which is very important for the vasectomy reversal community, because there is some stuff which they don't study either that the longer you restrict the flow of sperm, your body just reabsorbs that. It has to go somewhere. So the body reabsorbs that. So when people have had a reversal and it's been a long time since the vasectomy, the chances of DNA fragmentation and issues with the sperm are higher because your body starts developing these immune markers and thinking that it's something that it needs to deal with, because naturally the flow shouldn't be restricted. You shouldn't be, right?
Right.
And so, and it obviously that's not anything that's ever talked about when people have a vasectomy. And I mean, that's not obviously the path that you took, but even just understanding the body and how it works is so important, I think, when you're making decisions on your future children. Because if you're just bypassing the natural process that God has put into your body, and then the outcomes are not what you anticipated, that hurts my heart and like punch to the gut when you're not really even set up for success to begin with, because it's like we just want to get from point A to point B and this is what we're going to do. So in your case, it made sense that the clinic would recommend that because that's what they do. But they never were asking those questions. But even you have, I mean, we talked about this morning, you have embryos still frozen, and it may not have been something that was even addressed. Like, what do you do with them once you have them if you're not using them all?
I think the question with that is do you sign something that says you have to identify where your embryos are going to go after the fact? Yes. Is there someone really counseling you saying, I only have 3 embryos, but there are people that end up with 16. Are you going to have 16 children? And if you're not going to have 16 children, because some people wish to have that many children, not I, but if you're going to have 16 children, or if you're not going to have 16 children, what are you going to do with your embryos? You have 3 choices. You can donate them to science, you can discard them, or you can donate them to another couple, or you can use them. So 4. I don't believe that had I known, like, love my son, I would not change anything for the path we took. However, today we are left with the question of what do we do? We are of the belief that life happens at conception. When my embryo was placed in me, he immediately had a heartbeat. I believe that's a living thing, so I cannot discard it to research. I cannot discard it to just discard it. So now we're left with the question, what do we do? There's now a moral dilemma of what do you do? And I read recently there are about 1 million embryos in storage. 52.5% do not return for a later action with their embryos. And there are about 1 in 5 that are left over. And about, what was it? I have it up here right now. There were about 45% of them go to donation, 50% of them are discarded, and 4.1% choose a donation for another couple, and then the rest are just left. That's a lot. When you're talking about 1 million embryos, over 90% of them are just discarded. That's a scary fact.
Especially if you've fought so hard to get to that point, and I mean, I always ask that. Have you had the conversation with your spouse ahead of time? Because when you're in the emotions of just wanting a baby yesterday, I don't think that that is the time to really fully grasp that, right?
Right. Like when you are in the thick of it and you're trying to get your embryos and you're trying to get pregnant and you're trying to become a mom and no one sits you down to really prepare you for when you finally have those embryos, what you're going to do next. There's no counselor saying, hey, when you're going through this, you're going to come to a critical decision that you have to make. It's going to be emotional. It's going to be spiritual. It's going to be a moral decision that these embryos are going to be connected to you for years. And it's going to be years of grief and prayer and loss and hope and longing. And I think families deserve a space to talk about that before you are already in the middle of it.
Man, so true. And the other thing that really sort of irks me as far as the IVF clinics, yes, it is a way to get from point A to point B, but let's say you're having all of these medications so that you are creating more eggs than you would naturally do, but you change nothing about your lifestyle or diet. So now you've normally been used to eating, let's say you have an apple, you were feeding your 1 egg. So you're giving your child the full apple. Now all of a sudden you have all these medications and there's 8 of them. Now you're dividing that 1 apple into 8s and feeding it. Wouldn't you rather give your child the full apple to sustain them than an eighth of what you were, but that's also not something that anyone considers. I mean, you talked about that they didn't even look at iron or vitamin D. And I was curious about my own vitamin D when we were going through the process of IUI because it was just everything's normal. Well, normal is not optimal. And if you've been around on this podcast, I say that all the time. And even looking at your labs, like there were some things that I would have investigated further that were not looked at. Like any of the metabolic stuff was not looked at. The thyroid, it wasn't a full thyroid panel, especially if that had been part of your history that you were already addressing. Like I would have personally looked into that more because I don't want people to get to that point. I want everybody to have babies. That's my most favorite thing in the whole world. But I
Yeah.
don't want them to get to that point where they're just, I mean, it's not set up for success in most cases, unless you're seeing somebody who is, functional or holistic, which most fertility clinics are not built that way.
No.
It
Well, they're
it
built
is
to
big
just
business.
yeah, it's a big business. They're built to collect your money and let's just go through the next one. Just a factory.
And I mean, that's the thing that's frustrating to me. It's like you've spent all of this time and money and emotional, and also like a big thing that I'm, a big advocate for people in their marriage. Like trying to conceive is a hard season. And if you're foundationally, your marriage is rocky, all of these things are just compounded by adding in children or decisions, miscarriages, whatever may come in that process. And so, I had a lot of, my own abandonment issues from my dad's suicide that I had to like sort of work through that I'm glad the process sucked. But like, I'm glad that I came to that to really understand like how God sees me and loves me before I brought more kids because it just made me a better mom.
Yeah. And I think one thing that's intriguing to me about the whole process of going through IVF is I found it interesting throughout the whole process. I was not really ever offered to talk to someone or, hey, here are these other avenues. Maybe you should look at XYZ. Maybe you should see a functional doctor. Maybe they can look at things a little deeper than we can. Or go see a therapist because they can help you in this process just with your marriage and whatnot. The only time we got offered a therapist was when I went to go get my donor eggs because of you're taking someone else's and putting it in your body. But I don't care about your body necessarily. But when we're taking from one person's body and putting it in another person's body, we have to make sure you are okay. And that was the most interesting fact to me because I was like, wait a second. You didn't want to ask me if I was okay earlier in this whole process? You don't want to make sure that I was mentally okay or my marriage was okay or anything? Okay.
Like that just like rips my heart because I know there are so many stories like this. And obviously, I've mentioned this. That's why I'm so passionate about what I do because I want to look at the full picture. I want to advocate for amazing marriages and families. Yes, I want you to get pregnant, but I want you to have an amazing pregnancy and postpartum and to be able to like run after your kids and keep up with them and not just live life on the sidelines. I really want to create healthy generations. Like ultimately that's really what I care about. But I'm curious what you would say to the woman who's listening, who's in that desperate place right now where she just wants a baby and feels like I'll just figure out the hard questions later. What would you encourage her to slow down and consider?
I think I would just encourage her to really slow down and think about like what it's going to look like on the other side, to stop and think about like, is there a different way I can do this that's going to be healthier for me, healthier for my baby, healthier for my marriage? Just take a moment, really, just pause. And I know you have this like desire to have a baby and it is so strong. Just like the little kid that wants to touch the stove, and you can't wait. But when you touch the stove, you finally realize what's going to happen when you touch the stove. Don't let that feeling of wanting to have a baby overtake all the things that could happen if you just go straight to just going to IVF or another route. Really take time to think about if you do go through that, what's going to happen on the other side? What does that look like? You're going to have real questions to ask yourself. Your body's going to be different. Just pause, look at other avenues. Functional medicine is an amazing thing. God created your body and the earth to work together, and you don't have to pump your body full of all these other things to make and create. Just think about, I just wish I had stopped and not let myself, my emotions take over, my emotions and my desires to have something take over what I knew. Cause I knew in my head, I was like, this doesn't feel right, but I just want to have a baby.
Well, and even like you were sharing, you texted me some photos the other day of like the acne, like, oh, this is like I mean, I think that there's so many like unspoken realities of what happens when you are artificially making life happen. Again, a fantastic tool in some cases, but the thing that gets me is it's the blanket answer, the only answer that is given for a lot of people. So I would love for you to kind of share some of the down and dirty, the dark side of IVF that no one's talking about publicly.
I think for me, I know I experienced when I started taking all the hormones, I had never had acne my entire life. My face was awful. I had so much acne. My tummy was completely bruised up. I swear that my bottom has like an indent from the amount of shots I got. Where I always got my blood drawn, like I've got like a nice little incave right there because I had so much blood drawn from me all the time. I think the first time I got my blood drawn so they could do everything, there was probably like 15 vials. And that was the first time of many because it took us 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. I mean, 8 years to get our kids. So, and in that I had 2 rounds of IVF, 2 rounds of donor IVF, a miscarriage. I had it all. And so it changed. I mean, today I'm struggling to lose all my baby weight because I think that my hormones are just still so out of whack because of the amount of time I pumped my body full of hormones. I can't just like go and work out and it'll just go away today. And I want to do it in a natural, healthy way. So I want to look at my hormones before I pump myself full of anything else. So there's some ugly sides to, I mean, and then when you're being pumped full of those hormones, can you imagine how you are as a person? I don't think I was like my husband's favorite person all the time. I was probably a very difficult person to live with because I had so many hormones that my body was just not used to.
Yeah, that's so good. And I would love for you to talk about what has God redeemed in your story that maybe you just couldn't see it while you're in the middle of it. I mean, we talked about this because when I was looking through your labs this morning and I was like, I can tell you what I'm going to see, but I don't want to like, it was kind of like a disclaimer. Like, I don't want to stir up a lot of stuff because it's like you have the kids that God intended for you.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we can, I mean, in life in general, we can look back and think like, oh, coulda, shoulda, woulda, or have guilt about certain things. And we can't let that like overtake the beauty of the gifts we've been given. But what has God redeemed that you couldn't see in that, maybe in the thick of it?
I think in the thick of it, I think the one thing that he has shown me, and we've talked a lot about it actually lately at church, is having faith the size of a mustard seed. Like I have to realize that no matter what is going on in my world, no matter what is happening, I have to trust him and have enough faith in him, just even if it's the size of a mustard seed, because he has everything already written out and I cannot control anything. It is my life, your life, everything is already written and I cannot change it. I cannot control it. I cannot do anything. I just have to trust him and trust the process. And it's just going to be like a parent. There are going to be days where I'm going to go to him and be like, I don't understand. I'm so angry at you, but I know you love me. And I think that's the one thing that has changed in me is learning to trust him and just have faith in him more than I have ever before, because I have these 2 wonderful children, and without a doubt, I know these children are meant for me. Like my daughter is a copy paste of my personality some way, somehow. I don't know how it happened, but she is my daughter through and through. She is my daughter, and I know she was meant for me, and she was meant to be in our family. And I just have to trust the process and trust what he's doing. And even though it does not look like it's going to be how I want it to be, I cannot control anything that he's doing. Just like my pregnancy, I was pregnant. I did not have my son until I was like 43 weeks. I went in to have to be induced. I was in the hospital for 3 days. He still did not come. 43 weeks later, we had a C-section. Not what I thought, not what I would have wanted, was out of my control. But that's what was supposed to happen. And I just have to trust. I think that that's my redemption story, is trusting and having faith in him no matter, and pausing and talking to him and really leaning into him in those moments where I have questions and I don't understand, because how can I have a relationship with him if I'm not speaking to him? So I think that that's the one thing that I took away from all of that, is like, trust him, talk to him. You just have to have a little bit, just a mustard seed. That's it.
Well, and I think that that's such an important aspect, because the devil wants to get in your head and speak those lies, make you question God's plan for you. Are you supposed to have more kids? Is it ever going to happen? Is there something wrong with me? And sometimes we can allow that fear, that doubt to creep into our heads. And then we start acting as if those are the truth. And if you're not tuned in to the Lord, His word, His truth, His power, then yes, you will. I mean, that was a big thing that I was reading in a book. It was like for people who were pregnant over 40. And she was saying in there to act as if you were already pregnant, to have that mindset. And I can't tell you how many people come to me where the fear, and mainstream is great at like advocating for all of the fear. They're going to tell you every worst case scenario. They're going to tell you in your 20s that you basically look like a 45-year-old woman, which, by the way, as a 45-year-old woman, I take offense to that, because that whole like fertility after 35 is just a bunch of malarkey. So your mindset is huge. And I think if you're giving into all of that and you're not tuning in to what God's telling you, you're going to be distracted by the noise for sure.
I think you just said it. In the Bible, it talks a lot about what you speak. And when you speak, it comes to life. And so the more that you believe and you speak out loud that your body is whole and healed and can carry, and you're speaking truth over your body, imagine the things that can change. But you said it best. The devil loves to speak in your ear. And so it's just reminding yourself and going to his word and really leaning into him, because what you speak really can bring life or death to you.
100%. And I know somebody's listening, they probably have some questions. So are you willing to share how people can connect with you, find you, and any last parting words that you would like to share?
Yeah, more than welcome to reach out to me on my Instagram at Rise and Root Method. My DMs are open. I will love to chat with anyone that has any questions, or, just wants to pick my brain about anything or my own experiences. Yeah, that's where you can find me, Rise and Root Method.
And I'll make sure that's in the show notes. And I mean, you and I were talking about this before, and I think maybe when we first met, and we were talking about what it is that I do and how passionate I am about natural pregnancy. And your thing was like, oh my gosh, the longer I hang out with you, I might end up pregnant. I'm not sure I want to be. So, which is like, I don't know. I take that as a compliment, because fertility is just a byproduct of good health, and I want everybody to be in good health. So anything else you would like to add before we jump off?
I don't think so. I think I do. I will say I have been using LifeWave patches, which I have seen a difference in my body since then, which I will advocate now for the rest of my time. And I'm sure, I don't know if you've spoken about it on here, but I've seen a change actually in some of the things that I've experienced lately with my body. And so that's the one thing I will leave here, is if you are going through a fertility journey and you do want to be pregnant, that could be an added benefit to use.
100%. That's why I actually integrated. I mean, I had a personal success with them, and then I started like going down the rabbit hole and all the science behind them and how they could apply to the fertility journey. But what's beautiful is it's just your own body doing what it was created to do. I mean, I've had plenty of post IVF clients come to me whose hormones were all out of whack, and this helped level them out naturally without having to get on, HRT or whatever, which is amazing. I mean, I had somebody that hadn't had a period in 2 years, and doctors were just like, "Oh, you're in menopause at 43," and started patching, and 2 weeks later, she had a beautiful cycle. And so, yes, I'm glad that you brought that up because it is a powerful, powerful tool. I
Yeah.
mean, I could go on and on and on for hours on the changes I've seen even in sperm health, particularly after reversal, like really because it is working on the mitochondria, which all of us as we age, all kind of on a decline. So it is a tool if you want to reverse all of that. Never mind that your skin looks better, your hair starts growing faster, and all of these other aesthetic benefits. But just from a health perspective, for me in pregnancy, post C-section, and postpartum, night and day difference on my fourth go around. So I'm glad that you brought that up. Anything else you want to add?
Now, if you're just in the thick of it, just take a moment, look at all avenues. There's not just one way to get pregnant. There are multiple ways. And what's being told to you in mainstream isn't the gospel. Just know that. And you can find other ways to get pregnant and it will be okay. And your plan is already written.
100%. So good. Well, thank you so much for taking the time for sharing your story. It is the journey is never without, hills and valleys, right? And I think when we're in the valley, we can feel like, oh, I'll never get up the hill. And of course, in hindsight, it's easy to say the lessons learned along the way. And I don't know if you can speak to this, but I personally wouldn't trade any of that at this
Yeah.
point. But in the thick of it, you're like, can we just get to the good part?
Yeah. Can we skip to the good? There's a song about it. Can we just skip to the good part?
Meanwhile, those valleys I can look at as absolutely the good part. Not fun, terrible, but it was part of the good part.
Absolutely. I don't think my marriage today would be where my marriage is today had we not gone through what we went through, because it really showed us that we really had a foundation built. And so where we are today, I think we would not be married had we not gone through that, I don't think.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here. It was such a good, I've been dying to have this real conversation about the ups and downs of IVF. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to Faith Over Pharma. If this episode gave you hope, clarity, or helped you look at fertility differently, share it with a friend who's trying to make sense of the waiting and all the conflicting advice. And if you're ready to discover what may be standing between you and the baby you've been praying for, head over to SusanGladstein.com.
Thanks for listening.